Good morning, all. Welcome to the DR 4825 Remnants of Tropical Storm Debby Applicants Briefing. Hello again. Welcome to the Applicants Briefing for DR 4825, the federal disaster declaration for the damages caused by the August 8th to 10th, 2024 remnants of Tropical Storm Debby. My name is Jim Serqua. I am with the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, or more commonly referred to by the acronym DHSES, pronounced dishes. This presentation and the narrative will be posted on the dishes website shown on this slide. We will be posting other pertinent information as it develops, so we urge you to visit the website frequently and take advantage of the information posted there. We have a lot of very important information to pass along to you today, so please, if we could ask you, mute your phones and laptops so that we can cover the material and everyone can have the opportunity to hear the presentation. The federal government assigns a disaster number to every federally declared disaster, and the number for this New York disaster is DR 4825. There are some very important regulatory deadlines that must be met by applicants. Many of these deadlines are triggered by the declaration date. For DR 4825, that date is September 24, 2024. We will cover these deadlines later in this presentation. The incident period for DR 4825 is August 8, 2024 through August 10, 2024, which means that all damages must have occurred on those dates and be a direct result of the remnants of Tropical Storm Debby to be considered for eligibility by FEMA. In addition, certain emergency protective measures taken in anticipation of the storm may be eligible, even if they were performed prior to the incident period. The federal cost share is set at 75%, which means applicants will incur a 25% local cost share on their projects. While in many past disasters the state has picked up a portion of the local share, this decision has not been made at this time. The FEMA Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, commonly referred to as the Papa G, in effect for DR 4825, is version 4. Papa G version 4 can be found on the FEMA.gov website, the DISHES website, and in the Resources tab of the Grants portal. Papa G version 4 is over 200 pages with another 50 pages of appendices. Please carefully consult the sections relevant to your projects. This slide shows the key personnel assigned to manage DR 4825. Lai Sun Yi has been assigned as the Federal Coordinating Officer. DISH's Commissioner Jackie Bray is the Governor's Authorized Representative and State Coordinating Officer. DISH's Deputy Commissioner of Disaster Recovery Programs, Rihanna Gonzalez, is the alternate Governor's Authorized Representative and Deputy State Coordinating Officer. And Anthony Gagliardo is the Disaster Assistance Manager, or DAM. This map shows the counties declared for DR 4825. As you can see from the map, Allegheny, Broome, Delaware, Essex, Franklin, Jefferson, Ontario, St. Lawrence, Steuben, and Yates counties have validated damages over their county thresholds. A request to add Shenango County to DR 4825 has been submitted to FEMA. We will advise when a decision is received. So what is public assistance? The key is to remember that the FEMA Public Assistance Program is a reimbursement program that provides financial assistance to eligible applicants recovering from the impact of the declared event, DR 4825, for the remnants of Tropical Storm Debby. Proper documentation of the work performed will be crucial to an effective and timely reimbursement process. This slide shows the FEMA Public Assistance process steps. We are now in the applicant's briefing phase and will cover the remaining process steps in this presentation. The submission of the Request for Public Assistance, or RPA, is one of the most important steps for applicants. The deadline for potential applicants to submit their RPAs to DISHES for DR 4825 ends on October 16, 2024. This will give DISHES time to review the RPA, coordinate any needed corrections with applicants, and submit the RPA to FEMA before the 30-day deadline of October 23, 2024. FEMA will deny late submissions unless the applicant and the state can clearly show that any delay was due to circumstances beyond their control. Simply stating that a key person was on vacation or you were occupied with other issues will not be sufficient, and FEMA will deny late RPAs. We encourage you to act immediately on this requirement. The RPA packets for both governmental and private not-for-profit entities are available on our website. We will cover additional details on the RPA in this presentation. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact us immediately. Submit your RPA before the deadline, even if you are waiting to hear back from insurance or the Small Business Administration. Do not wait to submit or to ask for assistance if needed. As an applicant, you should immediately begin preparing your damage inventory if you have not already done so. When your request for public assistance is approved, FEMA will assign a program delivery manager and DISHES will assign a state disaster assistance representative, or DAR, to assist you through the process. They will contact you to schedule an exploratory call to discuss your damages and needs and schedule the recovery scoping meeting. During the RSM, FEMA, the state, and the applicant will review the applicant's damage inventory and start formulating the damages into logical projects. The RSM triggers the 60-day clock for the applicant to formally identify all damages to FEMA. This is a hard deadline, and failure to meet it may result in damages that were identified late being denied. It is critical to record all damages on the applicant's damage inventory within this 60-day period. For damages identified after the 60-day period, applicants must submit a request on letterhead to the Disaster Assistance Manager. If there are valid reasons that precluded the timely identification of all damages, such as inaccessible damage sites, you must notify your FEMA state team immediately to arrange assessments of those sites as soon as possible. Please be aware that oversights, competing priorities, staff turnover, and poor record keeping or other circumstances within the applicant's control generally will not justify the addition of damages identified after the 60-day deadline. Applicants should already be undertaking a comprehensive survey of those damages and costs they incurred as a result of this disaster. For DR 4825, Category A and B projects will be submitted using FEMA's streamlined application process in Grants Portal. FEMA's goal is to conduct the exploratory call within 7 days of assigning a PDMG and to conduct the RSM within 14 days of the exploratory call. We will now cover eligibility criteria for DR 4825. This pyramid shows the tiers of eligibility. All four tiers must be eligible to obtain FEMA funding. We will cover all of these, starting with the bottom tier, eligible applicants. This slide shows the types of eligible applicants under the FEMA Public Assistance Program and should help you identify which category your organization falls into. State, local, and tribal applicants require only basic documentation to file their RPA. For private nonprofit organizations, commonly referred to as PNPs, FEMA requires additional documentation. To begin with, PNPs must also provide documentation that shows they own or operate an eligible facility where eligible services are performed within a declared county to be an eligible applicant. I will cover the difference in the two types of PNPs next. This slide shows examples of nonprofit organizations or PNPs considered critical as they perform services of a governmental nature. Eligible critical services are shown in the Papa G version 4, page 45. When FEMA approves a critical PNP, they are eligible for all categories of work. This slide shows examples of PNPs considered essential but not critical. Such applicants, when approved, are eligible for emergency work categories A and B. However, for a non-critical PNP to be eligible for permanent work, categories C through G, the applicant must apply to the Small Business Administration for a loan. If this SBA loan is denied for qualifying reasons, or the amount of the loan the applicant qualifies for is insufficient to cover the eligible damages, the applicant can seek reimbursement from FEMA for damages not covered by SBA. Most critical PNP applicants who intend to submit for damages for permanent work categories should submit their SBA loan request immediately. Don't miss the SBA loan application submission deadline. Check the SBA website shown on this slide to locate the loan submission deadline. In addition, all applicants who have damages that may be covered by insurance should submit a claim to their insurance carrier as soon as possible. Non-critical essential social services are shown on page 46 of the Papa G. Ineligible services are shown on page 47 of the Papa G. We encourage you to read the Papa G as it applies to your organization. This slide shows the minimum required documentation that must accompany the RPA packet for all private nonprofit applicants. Applicants must identify the eligible services provided at their facility. Eligible PNP services are listed in the Papa G version 4. FEMA may also ask for additional information if they deem it necessary to confirm the applicant's eligibility. Documentation and information requirements are shown on page 47 of the Papa G. The next tier of eligibility is the facility. Facility is defined as any publicly or PNP-owned building, works, system or equipment, or certain improved and maintained natural features. Unimproved areas such as fields or natural stream banks are not eligible. To be eligible, the facility must be the legal responsibility of the applicant, have damages caused by the August 8 through 10, 2024 remnants of Tropical Storm Debby, be in use at the time of the disaster, and not under the authority of another federal agency. For Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, however, FEMA will cover eligible debris removal and emergency protective measures if not covered by FHWA. For a PNP facility to be eligible, the facility must have been in use for an eligible purpose at the time of the declared event. For work to be eligible for the FEMA PA program, it must be required as a direct result of the declared disaster, the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant located in a declared county, completed within regulatory timeframes, which we will cover in the next slide, and authorized in the declaration. Another significant deadline initially triggered by the declaration date is the deadline for completing the work on an approved project. This is referred to as the activity completion deadline, also known as the period of performance. For emergency work, categories A and B, applicants have 6 months from the declaration date to complete the approved scope of work. New York State can grant an additional 6-month extension for emergency work for a total of 12 months from the declaration date. For permanent work, categories C through G, applicants have 18 months from the declaration date to complete the approved scope of work. New York State can grant an additional 30 months for a total of 4 years from the declaration date. Temporary facilities are normally approved by FEMA for 6 months. New York State cannot grant time extensions for temporary facilities. All requests for time extensions within the state's authority must be submitted in Grants Portal by clicking on the Request Extension link under the activity completion deadline in your project. You will be prompted to provide the justification for the time extension. All requests for time extensions that exceed the state's authority must be submitted in writing to the dam and will be forwarded with the state's recommendation to FEMA for determination. Such requests must provide documentation of delays beyond the applicant's control, a detailed justification for the delay, a status of the work, and a project timeline with a projected completion date. Sorry about that. Please remember that the activity completion deadline or period of performance is solely for completing the approved scope of work on the project. Project submission deadlines and closeout deadlines are addressed elsewhere in this presentation. See Papa G version 4, pages 196 and 197. This slide shows the categories of work under the FEMA PA program. As you can see, they are broken into 2 major categories: emergency work, categories A and B, and permanent work, categories C through G. Debris removal may be eligible when the debris presents an immediate threat to public safety or improved property, such as trees and branches in a public road. FEMA requires detailed information, and FEMA environmental specialists will review these projects to look for compliance with the National Environmental Protection Act and other environmental laws, policies, and executive orders. Please make sure that you document your work thoroughly to include the type of debris, amount of each type, location it was taken from, location taken to, including temporary staging sites, and the final disposition of the debris, such as whether it was chipped in place, taken to a landfill, placed in the DPW stockpile, etc. You may be required to document that the debris is the direct result of the declared event and not a pre-existing condition. Various criteria apply to different types of debris removal. For detailed information on the eligibility of debris removal, please see Papa G, pages 99 through 109. FEMA also has a 1-hour YouTube video called Understanding PA Debris Removal. Any debris on private property is normally the responsibility of the property owner. However, the applicant may elect to remove debris brought to the municipal right-of-way by residents, and FEMA can pay for removal from that point. The applicant must provide this service to all residents in their jurisdiction to be eligible. FEMA's alternative procedure for debris removal authorizes reimbursement for straight-time force account labor performing eligible debris removal. Just include such costs in your streamlined project application. Category B emergency protective measures are measures taken before, during, and after an event that will save lives, protect public health and safety, or eliminate an immediate threat of significant damage to improved public and private property. Just a few examples of such measures are shown on the slide. Many more are addressed in the Papa G. When evaluating whether the measure is eligible for reimbursement, FEMA now considers the time an applicant takes to resolve an immediate threat. Please take this into account when planning your emergency protective measures, as unnecessary delays may jeopardize your reimbursement. For details on the eligibility of various emergency protective measures, please see Papa G version 4, pages 110 through 139. This slide shows the criteria relevant to permanent work repairs. An important factor to consider when developing permanent work projects are any mandated codes and standards and any consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards that may apply to the work. These codes and standards must be considered by all applicants during the development of the scope of work and cost estimate. Sometimes disaster-related damages trigger repairs to a facility that go beyond restoring the facility to pre-disaster design, function, and capacity. When these improvements are mandated by formally adopted codes and standards, they may be reimbursable. Upgrades merely suggested or recommended by authorities or industry practice may not be eligible as a mandated code or standard, but they may be eligible as part of cost-effective hazard mitigation where appropriate. Please see Papa G version 4, pages 145 through 153 for criteria relating to codes, standards, regulations, and permits. FEMA has made the application of consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards mandatory for certain types of repair work. For further information on this policy, please refer to the FEMA Recovery Interim Policy FP 104-009-11 version 2. The intent of mandating CBCSS measures is to increase resiliency, protect lives and property, and reduce the cost of future events. As previously mentioned, the applicant is responsible for identifying any triggered CBCSS when developing the scope of work and cost estimate. FEMA policy shown here on screen, FP 104-009-11 version 2, is effective for DR 4825. A copy of the CBCSS policy is available on the Dishes Recovery website for DR 4825. The appendix to that policy lists all the FEMA recognized CBCSS publications organized by the type of work they apply to. If you use a code or standard that is not listed in the appendix, but has the same or similar requirements as a listed publication, please provide a comparison of the relevant provisions to support your reimbursement for your project. Failure to apply the appropriate CBCSS could make your project subject to deobligation and loss of funding if audited. This CBCSS policy applies to permanent repairs to buildings, electric power, roads and bridges, along with potable water and wastewater systems. We recommend that you employ the use of an engineer to assist in determining what standards apply to any repairs that you undertake that fall into one of the CBCSS categories. The FEMA CBCSS policy must be reviewed prior to finalizing the scope of work, as any CBCSS triggered will have to be identified in the scope of work and the cost added to the project by FEMA. If these codes are not triggered in the repair, the applicant must attach a signed statement to the project attesting that they have reviewed the FEMA policy and CBCSS did not apply. If consensus-based codes are triggered, the applicant must clearly identify the applicable codes and add them to the scope of work. FEMA will require a written, signed, and stamped certification from an engineer or other qualified individual that any applicable CBCSS have been applied. Once the project is completed, the applicant must attach the statement to the project documents section in Grants portal. The engineering costs are eligible for reimbursement if they are reasonable and necessary. Again, we urge that you consult with an engineer if you have any damages to these types of facilities. This is an example of a proper CBCSS statement where codes were not triggered. The statement should be on the applicant's letterhead, identify the project to which it pertains, and be signed by the applicant or their engineer. In some cases, we have seen this statement included in the applicant's engineer report. If CBCSS were triggered, the body of this statement would identify the organization from Appendix A for the FEMA interim policy and the specific CBCSS that was triggered, and completion certificate must be signed by an engineer or other qualified individual and provided when the work is completed. The first category of permanent work is Category C, which covers repair or replacement of roads and bridges. It may include facilities that are adjacent to damaged roads like sidewalks, streetlights, culverts, or drainage channels. Applicants may be required to produce maintenance documentation to demonstrate the pre-disaster condition of the facility as evidence that the claimed damages are the result of the declared event. The FEMA Public Assistance Program does not cover the cost of permanent repairs on FHWA roads. The cost for eligible emergency work may be reimbursable by FEMA. New York State DOT is responsible for coordinating repairs on FHWA roads and requesting emergency relief from FHWA. Please coordinate with the NYSDOT Regional ER Coordinator for any damages on FHWA roads. FEMA policy, Public Assistance Guidance on Inundated and Submerged Roads, FP 104009-13, clarifies the eligibility of funding for public roads inundated by floodwaters directly related to a major disaster declared under the Stafford Act. Damages must be visible to the naked eye and a direct result of DR 4825, remnants of Tropical Storm Debby. Subsurface damages, even if validated by soil boring, sampling, or ground penetrating radar, are not eligible without visible surface damages. Any damages that appear to be traffic-induced or general deterioration, such as potholes or fatigue cracking, would be considered ineligible for FEMA's public assistance. Opening a road prematurely can cause damages by normal traffic that would not be covered by FEMA. Applicants need to allow sufficient time for saturated soil to dry out before reopening roads that have been inundated. Exceptions to this guidance include surface damage caused by emergency vehicles performing eligible debris removal or other emergency work necessary because of the disaster, or certain permanent work repairs as related to closed basin flooding. A copy of the Public Assistance Guidance on Inundated and Submerged Roads policy is available on the Dishes Recovery website under the DR 4825 webpage. Private roads, including homeowners association roads, are not eligible for FEMA public assistance. The next category of permanent work is Category D, which encompasses water control facilities such as dams, levees, canals, and spillways. As with all categories of work, it is important to document damages related to the declared event and be able to distinguish them from pre-existing conditions. For example, storm runoff may contribute sediment to an engineered channel. To be eligible for reimbursement, the applicant will need to document the pre-disaster capacity of the facility and show regularly scheduled maintenance. FEMA will only reimburse for removal of the sediment directly attributable to the declared event. Maintenance logs and photographs that document the condition of a facility prior to the declared event may be helpful in establishing eligibility. Category E covers buildings and equipment, including building contents. For purposes of the Public Assistance Program, equipment refers to tangible property with a useful life of more than 1 year and a unit cost of $5,000 or more. Applicants must promptly file insurance claims for any covered property. FEMA will deduct insurance proceeds from the cost of the project. The project must meet the minimum project threshold of $3,900 after the deduction to be eligible. Category F covers public utilities, such as power distribution systems, water and sewer systems, and wastewater treatment plants. The final category is Category G, which covers parks, recreational facilities, beaches, municipally owned rail systems, and any other eligible damages that are not covered by the other categories of work. Beaches must be engineered to a profile and maintained, and FEMA will require a pre-storm and post-storm profile, plus maintenance and renourishment records to consider eligibility. Special considerations cover several elements that can require a significant attention to avoid jeopardizing reimbursement. We will cover each of these elements in the presentation, but you should also discuss them with your assigned FEMA state team as you develop your projects to ensure they are addressed appropriately in the context of your specific claims. FEMA environmental and historic preservation specialists perform compliance reviews on all projects to ascertain whether the applicant has met applicable federal environmental and historical preservation laws, policies, and executive orders. These reviews typically occur prior to project obligation and again at closeout. Applicants must obtain all required permits for their projects from the appropriate regulatory agencies, which may involve the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and other agencies. See the Papa G version 4, pages 141 through 144 for additional information. Please pay particular attention to these requirements, as FEMA can deny funding on your project for non-compliance. Again, if you are not sure about what you can or cannot do, Please ask for guidance before you act. Applicants must comply with both federal and state legal requirements. While some state requirements, such as the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SECRA, mandate certain procedures, they are not identical to federal requirements, and you must still ensure that the requirements of the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, are met. For example, in a past disaster, a school relocated a building and conducted the SECRA process, but failed to complete the NEPA review, and FEMA deobligated the $500,000 project. So again, we urge you to make sure you follow all of the requirements and ask for guidance if you are not certain how to proceed. Also regulated by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Clean Water Act compliance for culverts in New York State is continually developing as laws and policy evolve. Guided by Sections 401 and 404 of the Clean Water Act, Section 10 of the River and Harbors Act, and Articles 15 and 14 of the New York State Environmental Conservation Law, New York State's Clean Water Act compliance for culverts promotes best practices and environmental safeguards for aquatic restoration of storm-related damages. Compliance can be a bit complex, so it's crucial that applicants reach out to both agencies before a project start to ensure proper plans and measures are in place prior to work if possible. There are a few ways to ensure compliance. To start, New York State DEC has developed the New York State Programmatic General Permit, NYSPGP-1, which you see on your screen, which is automatically activated once a federal or New York State emergency is declared and is applicable to 13 types of impacts. This permit is meant to streamline the recovery and restoration process and requires pre-construction notification to both the New York State DEC and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers before using it. If an applicant does not notify the agencies of their intent prior to using this permit, they could jeopardize funding. Further information, including eligible activity, pre- and post-construction notification requirements, compliance, and categories of work can be found on the New York State DEC website listed on the current slide. If unable to use the New York State PGP-1 permit, a second option to maintain compliance would be to use the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers nationwide permits. These permits are what was used prior to the creation of the NYS PGP-1 and are issued every 5 years jointly with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. There are currently 59 different types of nationwide permits that apply to all different types of work. Additional to note, communities may apply to all projects in all waters across the country with or without FEMA funding. Some of these permits may require pre-construction notification to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, while others accept a self-certification, and it is likely that regional and state conditions will apply. You can find further information and guidance relating to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers nationwide permits on the Corps of Engineers website listed on the current slide. Several statutes, executive orders, and regulations establish requirements to protect the environment and preserve the nation's historic and prehistoric resources. Historic sites require consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office, known by the acronym SHPO or SHPO, and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, known by the acronym THPO or TIPO, as appropriate. and the applicant is responsible for complying with all applicable federal, state, territorial, or tribal EHP laws, even if FEMA is not providing PA funding for all the work. Please keep in mind that historic sites are not limited to building-type structures. There may be other facilities that have historical significance. Any structure that is 45 years or older must be reviewed by SHPO and sometimes by TIPO before repairs can be made. An applicant needs to make every effort to afford FEMA the opportunity to perform EHP reviews prior to the start of construction for any permanent work project. Applicants should also proactively offer the information or documentation FEMA needs to complete its assessment to determine eligibility. It is the applicant's responsibility to substantiate eligibility of their work and costs. Proceeding with permanent work before FEMA completes EHP reviews jeopardizes PA funding. If an applicant fails to provide adequate supporting documentation for these projects, FEMA will not be able to complete the necessary EHP review as mandated by Section 106 of the NHPA and will deny the applicant's request. It bears repeating that applicants should seek appropriate guidance before proceeding and look to provide supporting documentation up front. Failure to comply with all applicable federal, state, territorial, or tribal EHP laws may result in loss of funds and potential penalties. Floodplains and floodways provide a measure of protection for residents and improve property from flooding events. Floodplains allow rising floodwaters to dissipate along the area adjacent to the waterways, and floodways are conduits for removing the water following the flood. Wetlands protect the environment and provide some protection from high water events. Performing any work in these areas is severely limited. Please make sure that you are aware of these areas within your jurisdiction and you follow all appropriate guidelines. See Papa G version 4, pages 149 through 151. Again, we recommend you seek guidance before you act. The Coastal Barrier Resource Act requires consultation with Department of State and imposes strict limitations on construction and repairs within those areas covered by the Act. FEMA is prohibited from duplicating benefits, so FEMA deducts all other sources of funding used for the scope of work on your project from your FEMA grant. The most common additional funding source is insurance. However, any other source, such as federal or state grants and monetary contributions from any source, public or private, must also be deducted. The Public Assistance Program also imposes a mandatory obtain and maintain insurance provision on all insurable damages that exceed $5,000. See Papa G pages 144 through 145. Failure to comply with this provision will jeopardize FEMA funding and render the facility ineligible for public assistance. Proof of compliance will be required prior to project closeout. If your facility is in a floodplain, you must have flood insurance. If you do not, FEMA will take a mandatory deduction equal to what the National Flood Insurance Program would have paid. For buildings, it is a maximum of $500,000, and for contents, it is also a maximum of $500,000. Damages that occur below grade are not subject to the NFIP mandatory deduction. We urge all applicants who have insurance policies to submit their claims as soon as possible. Section 406 mitigation refers to Section 406 of the Stafford Act, and is mitigation that is applied to facilities damaged because of the declared disaster. This slide shows common mitigation measures, but there are many more, and the FEMA state staff can assist you in developing appropriate measures for your projects. See Papa G pages 153 through 161. Hazard mitigation has proven to be very effective in reducing damages from future events and reducing costs to applicants and taxpayers. We are strong proponents of mitigation and recommend that applicants consider applying mitigation to their permanent work projects whenever it is cost effective and makes good sense. FEMA mitigation specialists will be available to provide guidance on developing appropriate mitigation measures. FEMA must determine that the proposed mitigation is cost effective based on one of three criteria: the 15% rule, the 100% rule, or a benefit cost analysis. Mitigation costing 15% or less of the cost to repair in kind is generally deemed cost effective. Specific types of mitigation identified in policy may cost up to 100% of the cost to repair in kind and still be deemed cost effective. Finally, for facilities that are subjected to repeated damages, a BCA may justify mitigation costs that exceed the cost to repair in kind. To evaluate cost effectiveness, the applicant must provide separate estimates for mitigation and repair in kind so that FEMA can compare them. All mitigation proposals must show they can reduce or eliminate damages from a similar event in the future. Once mitigation is approved, it becomes part of the approved scope of work of the project and must be completed. If an applicant determines that it is unable to proceed with an approved mitigation measure for any reason, the applicant must submit a request for a scope of work change to the Disaster Assistance Manager and receive approval from FEMA before you proceed with your project. Failure to comply may jeopardize your funding. Another mitigation program is found in Section 404 of the Stafford Act, which provides funding for mitigation measures that do not have to be related to damages caused by the disaster. The total funding available for 404 mitigation is based on the total damage cost of the declared disaster. Facilities throughout the state are eligible to compete for Section 404 funding, even if they are not located in a declared county. DISH's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program staff will provide notice of funding opportunities to all counties and guide applicants through the HMGP process. If you are interested in Section 404 mitigation opportunities or have questions, please contact our HMGP staff using the contact information shown on the slide. The final tier of eligibility is eligible cost. These include the cost for your own employees, equipment, materials, and supplies purchased or taken from stock, and properly contracted services to perform eligible work. Management costs are those costs applicants incur for the administrative work performed to submit their public assistance projects to FEMA. We will discuss management costs later in this presentation. Cost eligibility is covered in Papa G version 4, Chapter 6. FEMA will review every project to ensure the work performed was reasonable and necessary to address disaster-related damages and will apply the appropriate deductions for any funding received for the same work from other sources, such as insurance proceeds. For the applicant's employees, their salary or hourly rate plus fringe rates are reimbursable for hours spent performing eligible work. FEMA may require the applicant to provide a fringe rate for both regular and overtime pay for their employees. For emergency work, the applicant's budgeted employee costs are generally eligible only for overtime while engaged in eligible emergency work. There is an exception, however, for debris removal, where the applicant can also claim reimbursement for straight time. For temporary employees performing eligible emergency work, both straight time and overtime are eligible. For permanent work projects, both straight time and overtime are eligible for all the applicant's employees engaged in performing the approved scope of work. Force account labor costs are covered in Papa G, pages 68 through 72. Force account equipment is equipment you own, purchase, or lease, which is used for eligible work. Equipment is generally reimbursed based on hours of usage. FEMA gives credit for a full workday if equipment is used for half the regular workday or more. For example, a DPW worker drives a truck with a trailer and a loader to a project site and then uses the loader to work at the project for 5 hours, then loads it back on the trailer and drives back to the DPW yard. The truck and trailer are only credited with the actual hours in transit to and from the project site, but the loader that was used for 5 hours can be credited for a full workday since it was used for more than half the workday. FEMA cost codes establish hourly equipment rates. For leased or rented equipment, reimbursement is based on the rental lease agreement. When it is necessary to purchase equipment to perform eligible work, FEMA may reimburse the purchase price and the use of the equipment based on equipment cost codes or the actual fuel and maintenance cost. However, salvage value must be deducted once the purchased equipment is no longer used for federally funded programs or projects. Guidance on eligible equipment cost and disposition is covered in the Papa G, pages 72 through 76. Force account materials, such as road flares, emergency blankets, or rations, road salt, gravel, construction material, etc., are those you use from your stock or purchase for the eligible project. If you use materials from stock, you can document the cost by using invoices if available, or obtain 3 quotes from local vendors to establish the replacement cost. Items taken from stock must be tracked with inventory and usage records. You do not have to replace the materials taken from stock and used on your FEMA project before claiming reimbursement for those materials. See the Papa G, pages 74 through 76, for guidance on force account materials and disposition requirements. Donated resources are labor, materials, and/or equipment donated by a third party. For emergency work, categories A and B, the value of donated resources can be credited to the total combined local share of all the applicant's emergency work projects. For example, the applicant has 5 emergency work projects totaling $500,000. The total local share of the 5 projects would be $125,000. If the applicant assumes the entire local share, the applicant can claim up to $125,000 in donated resources. For permanent work, however, donated resources can only be applied to the project they are donated for. For example, the applicant has a permanent work project for $100,000 and receives $40,000 in donated materials that are used on the project. The applicant can only apply $25,000 of that material, since the local share on the project is $25,000. The remaining $15,000 cannot be used to offset the local share of another project. Please be certain to document all details relevant to donated resources. For more information on donated resources, please see the Papa G version 4 pages 88 through 92. All purchases and contracts must meet all local, state, and federal procurement requirements. Please pay particular attention to mandatory contract provisions identified in 2 CFR Part 200, Appendix 2. If some procurement procedures are suspended due to an emergency declaration, FEMA will require the applicant to justify the scope and duration of the suspension. FEMA reviews purchases and contracts for compliance, so make certain your documentation is in order. Procurement and contracting requirements are covered in Papa G version 4, Chapter 8. As stated on the last slide, all contracts must meet local, state, and federal procurement requirements. FEMA will review all contracts for compliance. If the contract is found to be non-compliant, FEMA may deny the project. Competitively bid contracts with a fixed cost and well-defined scope of work are preferred. Applicants who use mutual aid will have to comply with the provisions of those mutual aid agreements. If the agreements do not call for reimbursement to the provider, FEMA will not reimburse for mutual aid, but the applicant may be able to use the aid provided as donated resources. If the agreements do call for reimbursement to the providing entity, the entity must bill the applicant for eligible costs, who will then pay the provider and submit those costs to FEMA for reimbursement. If mutual aid resources are deployed to assist but do not get utilized to perform eligible work, no costs are eligible, including the cost for mobilization and demobilization. Lump sum contracts are acceptable and easy to monitor as they do not require the applicant to document the quantities used. Time and material contracts can be used, but require additional control measures. They must be reasonable and contain a cap such as not to exceed $200,000 or not to exceed 70 hours of work, which the contractor violates at their own risk. The idea behind time and materials contracts is to allow the applicant to respond quickly to an emergency. For scopes of work that will be performed over a longer period, applicants are expected to comply with normal procedures to procure contracts. Be aware of types of contracts that may jeopardize reimbursement. A cost plus percentage of cost contract is where a contractor says they will do the work for whatever it costs them, plus a percentage of that cost. For example, the contractor spends $100,000 on the work, and the percentage agreed on is 15%. The contractor receives $115,000. In this type of contract, there is no incentive for the contractor to work efficiently and swiftly. The more cost they incur, the larger their profit. This is an ineligible contract, and FEMA may make your project ineligible if you use it. Don't refer to FEMA reimbursement in your contracts. Making a contract contingent on reimbursement from FEMA will make it ineligible for reimbursement from FEMA. Do not contract with a debarred contractor. In addition, FEMA advises against the use of cooperative purchasing programs and piggyback contracts due to frequent compliance issues with federal procurement requirements. Federal procurement regulations have a requirement to actively solicit minority and women-owned business enterprises. The requirement does not mean simply putting a notice in the newspaper as part of your bid process. For example, language in a publication that says MWBE enterprises are encouraged to reply does not satisfy the requirement to actively solicit them. You need to identify MWBE contractors in your area and show active solicitation via email, telephone contact, or regular mail, and invite them to bid on your project. Failure to do so may make your project ineligible. The use of engineering services is encouraged for complex projects. Please make sure that the engineering design is limited to pre-disaster condition, plus eligible codes and standards. If mitigation is included on the project, that work should be identified and estimated separately. Estimates must provide unit cost for each component of the approved scope of work, not a lump sum amount. Applicant estimates must be prepared by a licensed professional engineer or other estimating professions and must be signed, stamped, and certified as being prepared in accordance with industry standards for FEMA to accept them. For more information, see Papa G pages 186 and 187 and Appendix L. Next, we will discuss Category Z projects. FEMA will reimburse an applicant's direct and indirect administrative cost incurred for submitting and processing its FEMA projects. Reimbursement is based on actual, documented administrative cost and is capped at 5% of the total of your obligated projects minus donated resources projects. Please submit your streamlined project application for Category Z management cost in Grants Portal. Applicants must submit full documentation of management costs at closeout. The federal share on Cat Z projects is 100%, subject to the 5% cap based on 100% of the total obligated projects, not on the 75% federal share. The management cost policy is contained in FEMA's interim policy 10411-2, Public Assistance Management Cost Interim, and FEMA's Public Assistance Management Cost Standard Operating Procedures. There is also guidance on this process available in the Resources section of Grants Portal. This slide shows some of the eligible management costs. Please begin capturing your administrative costs, including the cost incurred to attend today's applicant's briefing. You will need to document your administrative costs before requesting closeout and reimbursement for your Cat Z project. Some applicants in recent disasters have declined claiming Cat Z costs as they could not document those costs. Start documenting them now, beginning with attendance at this applicant's briefing. Reimbursement can only be claimed for management costs incurred during the applicant's authorized Cat Z period of performance, which is defined by whichever of the following occurs first. 180 days after the applicant completes its last non-management cost project, or 180 days after the latest performance period of the applicant's non-management cost project, or 8 years from the date of a major disaster declaration. DISHES must submit its recommendation on the applicant's Cat Z closeout to FEMA within 180 days of the expiration of the applicant's Cat Z period of performance. So applicants should submit all their Cat Z closeout documentation to DISHES within 90 days of their Cat Z period of performance. This slide shows an overview of the steps in FEMA's public assistance process. FEMA uses the Grants Manager Grants Portal database. Grants Manager is the FEMA side of the database, and Grants Portal is the applicant side. During initial project development, DISHES field staff are assigned to work closely with each applicant, and they are available to guide the applicant on submitting information or documents directly in Grants Portal. Once an individual project is obligated, Responsibility for monitoring progress on that project shifts to the Disaster Assistance Manager, or DAM. Although applicants continue to have the ability to initiate steps in Grants Portal after a project is obligated, DISHES advises you not to do so. Instead, please submit your request to the DAM so that DISHES can ensure that it is processed properly and the applicant is receiving appropriate guidance. For example, once your project is obligated, if you want to request a time extension, scope of work change, project closeout, or appeal, please submit your request via email to the DAM. Our staff will work with you to assemble and organize the necessary supporting documentation, and then DISHES will initiate the request and upload the documentation in Grants Portal on your behalf. There are 4 phases of the PA projects under the FEMA's delivery model. Each phase contains multiple steps. The process begins with damage assessments immediately after an incident occurs and culminates with project obligation, completion, and closeout. We are now in phase 1 at the applicant's briefing. To participate in a FEMA disaster recovery, applicants must have a Grants Portal account. Many applicants have established Grants Portal accounts because of participating in the COVID-19 declaration. Once a request for public assistance is approved, you can proceed with the recovery scoping meeting and start to formulate projects in Grants Portal. For emergency work categories A and B, there is a streamlined application format in Grants Portal for applicants to utilize. Applicants must create their damage inventory list for all permanent work projects, as streamlined applications are not yet in use for permanent work. FEMA's delivery model segregates site inspections, initial project development, and reviews conducted by Consolidated Resources Centers. DISHES assigns disaster assistance representatives, or DARs, to all applicants to assist you with your recovery. Coordination between applicants, DISHES, and FEMA is critical for successful PA projects. Recovery may involve a variety of complex projects and issues. Both FEMA and the state employ personnel to assist applicants with more complex projects. There are various elements of a project that will be necessary to develop to process your project. It is important to remember to thoroughly document all the information to support your project. This includes an applicant's decision-making process, invoices, contracts, insurance policies, claims and settlements, actual cost, photos, personnel policies, procurement documentation, proof of payment, permit applications and responses, etc. If you do not provide the required documentation, FEMA may issue a Request for Information, or RFI, and withhold reimbursement until you comply. FEMA and DISHES representatives will be available to assist applicants with developing their projects. You must provide a complete list of all of your damages to FEMA within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting. A late damage request must be submitted with justification to the DAM for all damages identified after 60 days, and FEMA has discretion to deny any damages identified after that deadline. This slide lists the normal site inspection process. Site inspections are not required for 100% completed work projects. If there are damages that require a site inspection, FEMA site inspectors will inspect those damages. These inspections may be in person or virtual, depending on circumstances. Therefore, it is important that you capture all the necessary information to document your damages, to include photographs, GPS locations, quantities and dimensions, site access issues, environmental or historic preservation issues, and mitigation opportunities. The site inspection results in a site inspection report. Make certain that the site inspection report fully and accurately captures all relevant damage information. FEMA has several consolidated resource centers located throughout the country. Disaster declarations for New York are supported by the CRC Atlantic in Puerto Rico. CRC operations are divided up by lanes based on the type of projects they handle. There are three methods for estimating project costs: applicant estimates, FEMA estimates, and expert panel review. We will discuss these in more detail on the next few slides. You can also see Papa G version 4, pages 180 through 183 through 189 for more information. FEMA will accept an estimate provided by an applicant that contains the necessary detail as shown on the slide. FEMA may request additional information if the information provided is insufficient for them to validate the estimate. Estimates prepared by licensed engineers must be signed and stamped by the engineer. Make sure that any unique issues that may impact on the project estimate are identified. For example, we had a situation where the project was estimated using a large crane, but discovered later that the crane could not access the worksite via the roadway, and we had to switch to a barge-mounted crane to access the site from the water, significantly increasing the cost. FEMA prepares estimates using the cost estimating format, or CEF, for work on a large project that is less than 90% complete at the time the estimate is prepared. With the small project threshold increased to $1,037,000, FEMA may use the CEF to validate the estimates for small projects that have higher dollar estimates. All estimates are reviewed by the FEMA Dishes team and the applicant before they are sent to the CRC for review and validation. On projects with a federal share of $25 million or more, FEMA will engage an independent third-party expert panel to evaluate cost estimates to determine if the cost elements are required, but the panel does not make eligibility determinations. Applicants can request the use of an expert panel for projects where the federal share will exceed $5 million. FEMA establishes project thresholds for each disaster. You must meet a minimum monetary threshold for an eligible project. To qualify, a project must have eligible cost of at least $3,900. All projects are then categorized as either a small project or large project. Small projects are those under $1,037,000, and large projects are those at or over $1,037,000. Let's discuss some differences between small projects and large projects and the requirements for each. Small projects are obligated and paid based on the approved cost estimate. Once approved, small projects are generally not amended to reflect changes in actual cost unless the applicant successfully appeals for a small project reconciliation. Applicants must promptly submit the completed P4 form to the DAM as soon as the work is complete to trigger closeout of the small project. With the significant increase to the small project threshold, applicants are advised to exercise care in developing their estimates. Large projects, on the other hand, must be paid based on actual cost, so they require a formal accounting process for closeout. Where appropriate, applicants may request progress payments for the portion of work on a large project that is already completed and fully documented, including necessary permits and proofs of payment. Applicants must promptly submit the completed P4 form to the dam as soon as all the work on a large project is completed to trigger the large project final accounting process. At that point, DISH's personnel will coordinate with the applicant to review all supporting documentation for the project and make a recommendation to FEMA regarding final payment and closure on the large project. Also, applicants are required to submit quarterly progress reports on all their large projects as long as the project remains open. The dam will prompt you to submit this report each quarter. DISHs will also provide additional briefings to applicants that specifically address QPR and closeout requirements. There are several standard items that FEMA typically deems necessary to support most projects. When you are working on developing your project, make sure you have the necessary documentation. Again, we cannot stress enough the importance of documenting all your actions and costs in support of your projects. Failure to do so will jeopardize your FEMA funding. FEMA has established a standard sampling policy for situations where a significant amount of documentation supports the project. Applicants will provide a summary list for each category, and FEMA will select an appropriate sample. The sample size will be 105 documents per category. Applicants will be required to provide 100% of the backup documentation for any category that has 105 documents or less. Capped projects offer some alternatives to traditional repair-in-kind projects. The three types of CAP projects are alternate projects, improved projects, and Section 428 projects. In each, funding is capped at the estimated cost to repair in kind, but the approved scope of work allows some flexibility. We will discuss each of these options on the upcoming slides. If an applicant decides that they do not want to repair a damaged facility and can demonstrate that it is in the best interest of the community to use the funds for a different purpose, they may request an alternate project. In many cases, the alternate project is used to purchase necessary equipment for the municipality. Another possibility is to use those funds to offset the mandatory National Flood Insurance Program deduction on another of the applicant's projects. The alternate project must be approved by both DISHs and FEMA before the applicant can proceed. The applicant is also responsible for rendering the original damaged facility safe and secure. The alternate project is capped at the repair cost of the original damaged facility. Alternate projects are only available for permanent work projects categories C through G. The capped amount will not include the cost of any mitigation considered for the original damaged facility because FEMA funding is not being used to mitigate the damages to that facility. Another option to traditional repair-in-kind projects is a scope of work that goes beyond returning the facility to pre-disaster condition to enhance the facility to meet the applicant's current needs. An improved project is appropriate when it is not possible to separate the cost of eligible repairs from improvements being made in conjunction with those repairs. For example, a municipality seeks to restore a damaged two-bay firehouse and simultaneously upgrade it to a three-bay firehouse under a single construction contract. FEMA may approve this scope of work, but will only reimburse up to the amount it would cost to return the facility to pre-disaster condition. Applicants may request an improved project only for permanent work projects. Keep in mind that the improved project must be approved by DISHs and FEMA before the applicant can proceed with work. Additionally, a recent change to FEMA policy allows the applicant to apply mitigation to the entire facility, including the improved portion. The improved project is capped at the cost of the original repair, plus approved mitigation. The entire project is subject to FEMA EHP review, including the portion of work that is not being funded by FEMA. In our third and final option to traditional repair-in-kind projects, Section 428 of the Stafford Act allows for alternative procedures wherein an applicant can elect to accept a fixed cost offer from FEMA in lieu of actual cost for large permanent work projects. There are some benefits to this program, but also some downsides. On the benefit side, it allows for some flexibility in performing the repairs and does not require tracking of materials to each specific damaged site. On the downside, if you run into unforeseen complications that cause you to go over budget, you cannot go back to FEMA for additional funds. If you are considering this option, please advise your FEMA state team immediately so that we may provide you detailed information before you make a commitment. Applicants must accept a fixed cost offer within 18 months of the disaster declaration date, which for DR 4825 is March 24, 2026. The 428 program offers some flexibility regarding the use of funds. The example FEMA gives in the Papa G involves a winding road with 5 culverts carrying it over a waterway. All 5 culverts are damaged by the storm, and the applicant wishes to replace the 5 culverts with a single bridge. In some circumstances, this flexibility may benefit the applicant. There are some drawbacks, such as limitations on appeals that will be discussed later in this presentation. Again, if you are interested, notify your FEMA state team so you can receive appropriate guidance prior to making your final decision. The Recovery Transition Meeting provides an opportunity for the applicant to review their projects with FEMA and DISH's field personnel to make sure that all the eligible damages and work undertaken has been captured in one or more projects and submitted into Grants Portal. It is at this point that you will be transitioned to the DISH's Disaster Assistance Manager, the DAM, who will then be your primary point of contact for any further actions that may be necessary, including scope of work change requests, quarterly reports, time extension requests, closeouts, and appeals. Please submit any such request in writing via email to the DAM. DISH's will review your request and supporting documentation and will enter it into Grants Portal on your behalf. When FEMA obligates your project, you will receive a project obligation notification from DISH's in the form of an email with attachments. It will include a copy of your approved project and the P4 form you will use to certify project completion. Please make sure you promptly return this form as soon as your project is complete so DISH's can submit it to FEMA and have the project closed in the system. The project obligation notification email identifies a 60-day window for appealing of that obligation. So please review the approved versions of your projects promptly and closely when you receive the notification and make sure everything is in order. If it is not, please contact the DAM immediately. All projects must be closed. Generally speaking, small projects do not require a formal accounting, but the applicant must submit the signed P4 project completion and certification form to the DAM immediately when the project is complete. Please track your projects carefully and submit the P4 as soon as each project is completed. For large projects, submitting the P4 triggers a formal accounting process. The applicant must submit the signed P4 immediately upon completion of the large project and be prepared to provide all supporting documentation for that project. Please coordinate with your DAM and manage your projects to ensure compliance. DISH's will offer additional briefings to applicants focusing on the quarterly progress reporting and closeout processes. The work completion date is the date an applicant physically completes the authorized scope of work. Once an applicant completes the authorized scope of work, they must promptly submit the project to DISHES for closeout by submitting the signed P4 form to the Disaster Assistance Manager. For DR 4825, that is Anthony Gagliardo. Delay in completing the closeout process may jeopardize your FEMA funding. It is very important to adhere to the approved scope of work on your project, or you will jeopardize your FEMA funding. As soon as you are aware of any need to change the approved scope of work, you must request review and approval of the change from FEMA through DISHES. You must receive written approval from FEMA before you can proceed with the change in the scope of work, or once again, you can jeopardize your project. Your written request to the dam should include detailed changes to the scope and cost estimate, reason for the change, and a construction timeline or project schedule. You should also consider whether the request should include an extension of the activity completion period of performance date. See Papa G version 4, pages 194 and 195. FEMA regulations impose deadlines for submission of the supporting documentation required to close a project out. Applicants have 90 days following the end date of the approved period of performance for their project to submit all required supporting documentation for that project to DISHES. Failure to provide the documentation within the required period will likely result in loss of funding. So please make sure that you are tracking your projects and comply with these requirements. A DISHES DAR may be assigned to assist with your large project closeouts. If you have any questions at any time, please contact the Disaster Assistance Manager immediately. FEMA may disallow costs and recover funds based on audit or review findings during or after the performance of the project to ensure compliance with PA program requirements. If funds that have been dispersed to an applicant are subsequently disallowed by FEMA, DISHES will recover those funds from the applicant and remit them to FEMA. FEMA may be required to recover funds if an applicant knowingly or negligently withholds or misrepresents material information, fails to complete the approved scope of work and comply with the terms of the grant, expends federal funds in error, or incurs costs that are unreasonable or otherwise disallowed. Applicants may appeal any FEMA determination within 60 days from the date of the determination. This 60-day deadline is for submitting your complete appeal package to DISHES, not just a notice of intent to appeal. The DISHES appeals team can assist you in developing your appeal if you promptly request our help. The small project reconciliation is a particular type of appeal. If you find that the estimate or cost on your small projects combined were insufficient, you may file an appeal for a reconciliation. You must file the appeal with DISHES within 60 days of completing your last small project. FEMA will then review your actual cost on all of your small projects. If there is a net cost overrun on all your small projects combined, FEMA may obligate the additional funds. However, if it is found that you have a net underrun, FEMA may deobligate the overpayment. For this reason, applicants contemplating a request for a small project reconciliation are strongly encouraged to contact the dam to request assistance. Exercising care in estimating small projects can minimize the need for these appeals, especially in view of the increase of the small project threshold to $1,037,000. FEMA may transmit a determination memorandum or letter via any method that confirms receipt, such as grants portal, certified or return receipt mail, or an email with read receipt acknowledgement. Accepting a Section 428 project limits the applicant's right to appeal that project. If you are considering a Section 428 alternative procedures project, please confer with DISH's staff regarding the parameters of 428 projects before making a commitment. There are two levels of appeals within the FEMA Public Assistance Program. The first level of appeal is to the FEMA Regional Administrator, which in our case is Region 2 with offices in New York City. The second level of appeal is available if the first appeal is unsuccessful, and it goes to the FEMA Assistant Administrator for the Recovery Directorate in Washington, D.C. An applicant can elect to go to arbitration in lieu of second appeal if certain criteria are met. Please discuss this option with the DISH's appeals team if you are interested. While the applicant can elect to have legal counsel and expert witnesses in arbitration, those costs are not reimbursable. Applicants pursuing arbitration must file their petition directly with the Civilian Board for Contract Appeals, not with DISH's or FEMA. Please consult the board's rules if you are considering arbitration. Again, the DISH's appeals team is available to assist when promptly requested. Here are some pitfalls to avoid. Please make sure that you follow all the procedures, guidelines, and regulations as we have said through this presentation. If you are not sure of something, raise the question to your dam and get an answer before you proceed. FEMA grants are subject to audit by both the New York State Office of the Inspector General and the federal DHS Office of the Inspector General. You must be able to produce the backup documentation on all your projects should you be audited. The documentation uploaded into the grants portal does not meet this requirement. You must maintain a complete file in your office on each of your projects. Audit requests may seek documentation that the applicant was not required to produce to FEMA. For example, if FEMA's sampling policy was used for validation, the applicant may not have provided all backup documentation to FEMA, but in the event of an audit, the applicant must produce all backup documentation if requested, or risk jeopardizing their funding. This includes, but is not limited to, acceptable proof of payment for all claimed costs. You will need a grants portal account. Submit your request for public assistance, the RPA, so DISH's can create your account for you, if you do not already have one. You will also need a unique entity ID. If you do not already have one of those, please go to sam.gov to obtain one. Once you have these, you can submit your RPA. Once your RPA is approved, FEMA and state personnel will be assigned to assist you in the development of your projects for DR 4825. Here is DISH's office contact information if you have any further questions. I will leave this up on the screen for a moment. This last slide contains some additional resources for you to consider should you need more information on the recovery process. On behalf of FEMA and the state of New York, we look forward to assisting you in pursuing reimbursement under the Public Assistance Program. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Joe Colarafi, who will moderate questions. Joe, are you there?
Any questions in the chat? If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I've answered a bunch of questions already, but if you have any further questions, please enter them in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions at this time. There is one question. Yes, and there will be a recording of this presentation posted on the website. So please visit the website. We hope to have it there either later today or early tomorrow. They'll be there tomorrow. So visit the website. You can download a recording of the presentation and the slide packet. Yeah, the web page is posted in the chat and on the slide. I'm not seeing any other oh, okay, there is one more question. How are permits from DEC/Army being handled? The applicant is responsible to apply for all necessary permitting from the regulatory agencies. So when you are considering a project that requires DEC or Army Corps permit, make sure that you coordinate with your team and make sure that you are requiring that permit and making the appropriate notifications if you're using a nationwide permit, which may require a pre and post notification. We also recommend that you coordinate with DEC whenever you are working on any sensitive areas that require environmental permits. I have a collapsed drain pipe that caused sinkholes. These were filled in with sand before any pics were taken. Would this be eligible? As long as you can demonstrate that the damages occurred as a result of the event and the cost of the project meet minimum thresholds, it should be eligible. Again, coordinate with the team once you're assigned, discuss these kinds of issues and damages at your meeting that you have with FEMA when you do that scoping meeting. And if you have any questions, my team will raise it upline.
Joe, this is Trish.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I see a question here that says our local fire department is a separate entity.
The chat.
I lost it.
Answered that question in the chat, Trish.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Next question I have are hazard mitigation expenses encumbered prior to RPA approvable eligible. You should not be undertaking hazard mitigation measures before you get an approval of that hazard mitigation proposal from FEMA. You may be able to do your repairs in kind prior to getting approval, but do not incur mitigation expenses prior to getting approval from FEMA. Next questions. Oh, thank you for this. We're receiving many questions from impacted homeowners about whether our county may qualify for the individual assistance program, in addition to this public assistance program for recovery needs in our community. Do you have any information to share on that process? We anticipate getting many queries about that as we work on these other eligible projects throughout the public assistance program. We have submitted for requests for individual assistance. We don't know yet how that's going to go. We also submitted a request for small business administration declaration, and keep looking at our website because we will be posting any developments on the website. If there were key questions answers in the chat, we may want to read them out loud as a group, as not all attendees may have been following the chat during the presentation. That's a question in there. Okay. In the chat, will presentation be available after this meeting? Yes, it will be. So visit our website and you can get a copy of that when it's uploaded tomorrow. Okay, next one in here is for repairs of thefts during the flood response, should these expenses be represented in a special way? Repairs, yes, but thefts, no. Thefts are not eligible expenses. When you have your recovery scoping meeting with your team, they will discuss your damages and assist you in formulating those repairs into eligible projects. Our local fire department is a separate entity. Would our municipality include anything from them? Expenses, coordination, communications, etc. Fire departments are considered critical PMPs and therefore are eligible applicants. If the fire department is under the jurisdiction of a local municipality, that municipality can be the applicant for the eligible expenses incurred by the fire department, providing those expenses meet minimum threshold. Guidance on calculating mileage. For example, the day after the flood, we had approximately 12 trucks running with about 15 loads of gravel carried by each of them to various locations. The trucks will be considered force account equipment, and as was presented in the slide, FEMA has cost codes covering the various types of equipment. And for the trucks, normally you would get an hourly rate, and then you will calculate the hours that the truck was used in eligible work, and that would be a force account equipment cost. The operator is separate, and you must provide the operator information and cost separately. Thank you. Will our municipality be contacted by the team? Or is there a number we should call to get that started? Once you are deemed eligible as an applicant in DR 4825, you will be contacted by the Dishes FEMA team. You set up your exploratory call and your recovery scoping meeting. Will the presentation show how to represent other municipalities that came to help us out? I'm sure you saw during the presentation, but what happens there is if you have a municipality that came, it's under the mutual assistance program, and it all depends on how your mutual assistance compact or contract is written and whether there is reimbursement required. So if there is, then the receiving entity gets an invoice from the providing entity, pays them, and then submits the bill to FEMA. If there are no financial considerations in the agreement, then you might be able to use those resources provided by the mutual aid as donated resources. Okay, where do we ask questions about completing the RPA form? You saw that on the slide. Please make sure that you contact dishes.sm.pa support@dishes.ny.gov, and they'll be able to provide you assistance in submitting your RPA. Okay, I don't know if I see anything else. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, there's one more here. Will a copy of the transcript be available? Yes. The narrative will be on the slides. Just say that the narrative is on the recording that's posted with the slides, so you'll be able to hear that. Okay, asking for a clarification for myself relative to Matt Turner's question, I believe might be asking if emergency protective measure taken during the emergency to mitigate hazards that were encumbered prior to the RPA are eligible. If you're taking emergency protective measures, yes, those are not mitigation. Okay, so emergency protective measures taken before, during, and after the disaster are eligible. The deadline for submission of the RPA is October 16th to dishes. That gives us time to submit it to FEMA within the allotted time. And I think that's it. Any other questions that we may have missed or that you have? Okay, if not, thank you for attending this presentation. We look forward to assisting you in recovery. Everybody have a great day.